Hello, my name is Owen, and welcome to a quick review of Brandon Sanderson's Rhythm of War, Book 4 of the Stormlight Archive, where we answer the question, is Rhythm of War great? For those of you that may know, or maybe if you've been around here for a little bit, you will know, I've been doing a reread of the Stormlight Archive in preparation of Wind and Truth, which has arrived. I got it in the mail last week. Very exciting. And this has been a fascinating reread for a multitude of reasons. The broader reason is, and I've said this before, just the conversation around Stormlight I find very fascinating because it's almost at this point, at least in my circles, people that wander around these parts, it's divisive and what people feel about it. There's people that live and die by it. There's people that think it's utter trash. Brandon Sanderson is becoming a controversial figure, and this always happens to ultra popular people, right? If you become the Taylor Swift of fantasy, you're gonna have an army of haters. And you know, I don't know where I stand a lot of the times. The first time I read Stormlight, I loved them all. I thought it was great. I loved all of his work. I reread Mistborn a year or so back, still thought it held up. And this in The Secret Projects I didn't like, which kind of took me away from Sanderson a little bit. Coming back to this reread, it's been like a roller coaster of emotions for me because I read Way of Kings. I'm like, that is a great book in the series, a great fantasy entry. Stormlight is a great series. Really excited for Words of Radiance, which was my favorite Stormlight book. The first time I read it, extraordinarily disappointed with it. Not that I thought it was bad, it was still good, but it wasn't great. It wasn't great. Oathbringer, same thing. I was just a little bit underwhelmed by it on the second read. And let's just recap the complaints we've had in previous, so we don't always have to repeat them. The arguments I was having was the problem with these Stormlight books was, first of all, they're a little bit too long. Okay, they needed to be cut down a little bit, especially the second and third one. And they're so plot heavy, or so much of the big text is plot heavy that those parts just fall flat when you know what's going on. It's like the things that are happening in the moment aren't that interesting. It's what they're leading up to was the interesting thing. And if you know that twist or you know that big moment, you know that big line already going into it, it really loses a lot of its luster. Not to say that there's not great emotional moments in all three of those books. I think these characters are still great fantasy characters across all the books. But I just felt that if you're reading a book that's 1,200 pages long and it's a 50-page battle sequence where it's just kind of like fluff, anime battle leading up to the one reveal of, is Dalinar going to side up with Odium? We know what happens. So I just felt like those scenes like really just felt like nonsense to me. It really felt like fluff, and especially the latter half of Oathbringer completely dragged for me. The beginning of Words of Radiance dragged for me, which I don't remember it dragging at all for me. So it was kind of disappointing to be reading bricks of novels and then have them be boring for me the second time. That's just setting the scene before we get to Rhythm of War, because I remember reading Rhythm of War the first time. Obviously, it was more recently than once because I did get this at release 2 years ago or whenever it came out. And I remember enjoying it. I do remember enjoying it slightly less than the other books. And I also remember the public opinion of the book at the time being that it was the worst of the four books. I don't remember like I didn't have negative feelings about the book when I read it, but I just like, people were like, oh, this is by far the worst one. He's falling off. Like, I remember reading that, and I'd be like, oh, well, I do think it was a little bit worse. I don't know if he's falling off, though. So on a reread, I was thinking, like, I'm going to be like the haters originally and realize how flimsy it was, realize how, like, didn't really progress the plot, realizing how boring it was, because all the complaints from the other books, I thought this must be that book just in its entirety, and I was scared. I was frightened. My Stormlight stock was at an all-time low. But this series has been so great, this reread series, because once again, I was surprised. Guys, Rhythm of War is a great book. And dare I say, it is on par with The Way of Kings, if not slightly better, guys. Stick with me, okay? Stick with me. I'm amazed that I've come to this conclusion, considering how my last two videos in this reread went. But I first of all, I think it's fascinating that I thought Words of Radiance would be the best and it ended up being the worst. I thought Rhythm of War would be the worst and ended up maybe being the best. It's just the power of a reread, ladies and gentlemen. But I really had a good time with this. I mean, I sped through it in like 8 days. I was like a kid on Christmas, right? I was just speeding through it. I'm like, oh boy, oh joy. That was me the entire time reading this book. And I have a couple theories as to why that is the case. Does it have its flaws? Of course. Does it have a lot of the similar flaws that the other books have? Of course. It's the same author in the same style, in the same series, in the same world. It has some similar flaws. The major flaw I have with the other two books about it dragging, though, about it being too long, I don't know if that was necessarily the case in this one. Is there a world in which this book is not 1,200 pages? Sure, I believe that there is. And would I liked it better if it was a little bit shorter? Probably. But really the only filler I've noticed in this book was the flashback sequences. I think the listener flashbacks were almost entirely useless. Thankfully, they weren't that long, and I was really able to just like kind of like enter the zone out zone when I was reading them. Because my problem with them is we're visiting Venli to kind of show her growth into where she is now. Except we already saw literally all of this in The Way of Kings. And Ashonai is a character who like we came to love in Way of Kings as well. So like their arcs that they're going through in the flashbacks, like we've already been given bits and pieces up until this point. So now you're just kind of spelling it out into longer scenes. I didn't find any revelation, any emotional beat in the flashbacks to be new at all. Even the end like reveal, like the Stormfather like giving her mercy. It's like that happened in the first book with Ashonai and her death. So there was really nothing that was revealed in those flashbacks that advanced Venli's character or changed her view in any way. And I get it's her flashback book just to show the contrast of where she was versus where she is. Because maybe if you don't reiterate it, you kind of forget like how much she betrayed her people in a way and how much she started this. But I just found that, and maybe it's because I was just rereading and I had the information top of mind, I didn't need that reminder. So it was largely a waste of the flashbacks. That being said, overall, these flashbacks were a lot shorter, I found, than in previous books. I don't know if there was less of them, I didn't count, but they felt like each one was like maybe 3 or 4 pages long, whereas Dalinar's and Oathbringer, which I thought were fantastic flashbacks, those were like entire chapters sometimes. So I think like Sanderson knew, or I get the sense, and obviously I'm making this up, I get the sense that maybe he knew that like this wasn't as pressing as maybe Dalinar's flashbacks were or Kaladin's flashbacks were. So he kept it short, and it was more just kind of like a reminder of like, this is where that character came from if you don't remember. Or this was Ashonai in her personality if you don't remember her. And I get that. I mean, the distance between the first book coming out and the fourth book coming out was like multiple years. So maybe he was doing it partially for himself as well. Who knows? But definitely that was the only thing I'm like, this is a waste of time. But if you're going to have a flashback and you don't have a great flashback idea, I guess, it's good to kind of remind people of character arcs for that. So that was the worst part of the book, I think. But other than that, in terms of like other complaints I have, like that's like basically it, which is why it's standing so highly in my rankings here. I think all of the storylines like hit perfectly every time. I think Adolin in Shallan's story and the Shadesmar starts a little slow. I just really don't like the Shadesmar guys. I think when they get to the city, it's fine, but I really don't like the journeying through Shadesmar. I think it's just like, it's too vague. It's too like, oh, like anything can happen. A Spren could be a sailor and they come into the market and they're like, there's humans here too. And it just feels like I don't know what's going on. I don't really understand like what, it just seems like I just picture like a video game, but like none of the polygons have loaded in. So everything's just like vague looking and they're just like kind of walking in a straight line and there's just like endless planes forever and you can't really see, like that's what I picture, like they're walking through a loading screen because it really is just a vamp. But Adolin does have a good moment where he like saves the Spren in there, so that kind of helped me with that, and they do quickly get to the Honor Spren city, and then it gets to the point where Dalinar's storyline is the least interesting of all of them, and even he is having these great like grapples, like with he's trying to learn his power. He's like playing chess with odium in his head, and those were some great moments too. And the fact that that was the weakest one shows how good the other ones were. I think Kaladin's story, and I know I in my last video I sarcastically said, oh, it's just Die Hard in the tower, right? And it's true, but then I remembered as I was reading, I'm like, Die Hard is a great movie. Like the tensions were high, and I think that's the crux of why this book is as good as The Way of Kings. And this is a conclusion I had. The problem with book 2 and book 3 is that they don't have what Way of Kings and Rhythm of War have, which is constant tension. Constant tension. In Way of Kings, I think the reason why those thousands of pages went by so quickly was Kaladin was in danger the entire time. And Shallan was kind of like our break. I mean, she had like an interesting goal, but she was kind of our break in the action almost, because he was always in danger of death, doing the bridge runs. He was a slave. He was in battles every single day. Every time you get a chapter, you know Kaladin's about to get into some shit. Is he going to survive? And that tension persisted through the entire story into the climax, which is an explosion of tension and satisfying conclusion. Words of Radiance, I didn't like the beginning. The beginning of that story is everyone's at a status quo. They don't really know what to do with the Radiant powers. They don't really know what that means. Kaladin's the guard. He's not telling people he's a Radiant. They're kind of just like doing the war thing still. And you're kind of like, what's going on? What do these characters want? They've all just settled, right? And the same thing kind of happens towards the latter half of Oathbringer, right? They go to Alcar. Elkahar dies, murdered by Moash. Very sad. They enter Shadesmar. What are we doing? Oh, we got to go to find the perpendicular. Where's that? I don't know. How do we find it? We walk around. Okay. And then Dalinar's like having like his depressive episode. So everyone's kind of just, again, stagnated. And that carries through the end of the book where there's the final battle, which I didn't find very satisfying. But Rhythm of War, we start the story, we have a little bit of introduction, everyone goes off on their quest, and boom, the attack happens. They take over the tower. Navani's in constant danger. Kaladin's in constant danger. And then they're in, like, the stakes are high for them. And in the thing with Shallan and Adelin's storyline is maybe like they're not in such high stakes the whole time in the journey, but there's an entire, maybe multiple parts, at least one part where we do not hear from them at all because there's no stakes in their storyline. Dalinar's in the war. He's trying to figure things out with Yasna. So we kind of check in with them, but we do not hear from the slow storyline for an entire part because Sanderson is very keyed into the fact that these characters are in mortal danger. We're going to stick with them. And even like in a granular basis in the Tower storyline, Kaladin's obviously fighting for his life. He's still having his struggle, but I feel like it feels more realistic now. Whereas Oathbringer, it's like, oh, just to remind you, Kaladin has depression. Just to remind you, okay, he's sad now. But it's like, why is he that sad? I don't understand. This one, it's like, we clearly set him up as he's having a lot of issues, okay? And he's going to have to deal with them throughout the course of this book. That did not bother me at all like it did in the other books. It didn't feel as tacked on. Because this is a Kaladin book. This is a book where he's the focus, where I felt Oathbringer, his growth wasn't the point. So, like, stay out of it. Don't tell me how depressed you are and waste up my page time, okay? In this book, it was very relevant. He was fighting for his life. He was trying to, like, literally die hard his way, jerry-rig Gabriel's to get his powers back, all great stuff. And then Navani storylines, the Navani POVs, were just a different kind of tension and a different kind of fascinating for me. I thought they was, like, some of my favorite chapters in the entire series were Navani's chapters. And I think the Raboniel, her as a villain, the most fascinating villain, the most complex, layered villain that we've encountered, which kind of helps really layer out this story as well, layer out this world in lore. The fact that they're working together, but they're working against each other, and the science of the world really comes together. This is Brandon Sanderson at his best, and that's what makes Mistborn so great. Is it's magic, but it's science, and he really kind of dives into that. In this book especially, I think this book does a lot more for the world building, for the implications of the world, and Roshar and the magic system than any of the books previous. And I think you can tell he relishes in that stuff because it's very, very strong. And I think Navani's character arc of her not being a scholar, her being a failure or whatever, but then her being so smart and kind of jerry-rigging a solution to the war, but the politics, it was all just worked so well in the conflict with the sibling. It was constant engagement. It was one of those books where every time you check in with someone, you're like, oh, I missed this person. I need to check in with them. I need to see what's going on. I need to see how they're doing. every single POV switch. And then the trial itself, we check back in with Adeline's storyline when it gets the most juiciest. Who doesn't love a courtroom drama? And that punch at the end, it hit all. It wasn't just like there's tension because there's a battle going on. It's tension because there's a battle going on. It's tension because people are dying. It's tension because she needs to solve the equation before time runs out. There's tension because they're fighting a losing war and odium approaches. There's tension because there's a courtroom drama. In every single cylinder, I think he fired on. And I struggle, and I don't remember what people said the complaints were, but if you have them, please remind me what they were, because I didn't find any of them, okay? And I think even Venli's story arc, even though her flashbacks weren't that good, I think her arc of being a part of the Parshendi, but being a Radiant, it just adds another complication to, like, that nothing is black and white. And I think, like, maybe more so in other books, it's been more clear-cut who the heroes are, who the villains are. This adding of complication, this gray area, and it kind of started that in Oathbringer by saying, like, oh, like, the humans are the invaders or whatever, but we still, like, beat the crap out of Parshendi for the last half of the book. This one, there's battles in between the Parshendi, with, like, the Fused and some of the Fused turning over, and I forget her name, Lushi, her kind of turning sides there. I thought that was fascinating as well. Excuse me. And overall, I just found it, I really didn't find any flaws with the pacing of this book, which is my biggest complaint of all of them. And it really makes me excited for Wind and Truth, because you end this book and you're really not sure where it goes, because obviously I think of the Sanderlanches, this is the strongest one as well, because it kind of carries in from the trial into the saving of the tower, into swearing the fourth ideal, and the only thing that didn't hit as hard is obviously Tef's death in this book, but other than that, I mean, even that, it wasn't like that was the lead-up moment. And Kaladin got over it, and it's how he leveled up, brother. So it was worth the sacrifice. And the reveal of Taravangian becoming Odium, like, I don't know what the implications of that are, which is a good question in the book. Sometimes you ask a question and it's like, why did you do that? In, like, a bad way? This is like, why did you do that in an I'm curious way? So there's good questions being asked in this book too, which again makes me excited for Wind of Truth. I'm curious to see how much of a conclusion Wind of Truth is, because I know there's, like, going to be another 5 books eventually, but this is supposed to be the end of, like, part 1. I hope it's satisfying though, but it leaves me extraordinarily optimistic for book 5 in this series, and I'm excited to read something completely new, especially because of how strong I felt this book was. And I feel like this would have been a controversial opinion when the book came out. I don't know if it's a controversial opinion right now, but please let me know. Do you like this book? I think it was great. I enjoyed it. I sped through it. And be sure to like and subscribe if you liked the video and you want to see more like in the future. And as always, thank you for sticking around.